In the peaceful village of Marundi, a kind and hard-working woman named Zalika lived a life filled with love and devotion. She had been born into wealth, raised in comfort, and had never known struggle. But unlike many women of her status, she did not seek a husband based on riches or power. Instead, she followed her heart. That heart led her to Tafari, a humble carpenter whose hands crafted beautiful furniture but whose pockets were nearly empty. Zalika saw something in him that others did not. His ambition, his kindness, and the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Her family was furious when she announced her decision to marry him. "A man like Tafari will never truly value you," her father warned. "He will take all you have to give and leave you with nothing." But Zalika refused to listen. She believed in love, in devotion, in the idea that two people could build a life together with nothing but trust and determination. So, against her family's wishes, she married Tafari, leaving behind the luxury of her old life to build a new one beside the man she loved. At first, everything seemed perfect. Their small home, though modest, was filled with laughter and warmth. Zalika worked hard to support Tafari, using her intelligence to help him manage his carpentry business. Slowly, they began to grow, and she was proud of what they were building together. She ignored the whispers of the villagers who wondered why a woman of her standing had chosen a poor carpenter. Love, she thought, was more valuable than gold. But love alone would not be enough. Though she did not see it yet, cracks had already begun to form in the foundation of her marriage, cracks that would one day shatter everything she had worked so hard to protect. The first few years of marriage felt like a dream. Tafari would wake up early, kiss Zalika on the forehead, and head to his workshop with a bright smile. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, sharing stories of their day, laughing over small things, and planning their future. Zalika loved watching him work, the way his strong hands carved wood with such care, the way he took pride in his craft. She believed their love was unshakable, a bond that nothing could break. But slowly, something changed. It was small at first, little things she barely noticed. Tafari started coming home later than usual, always with an excuse. "The orders are piling up," he would say, or, "I had to meet a new client." At first, Zalika didn't question it. She knew how much he wanted to succeed, and she was proud of his dedication. But then, the late nights turned into entire evenings spent away. He stopped telling her where he was going. When she asked, he would sigh in frustration, as if her concern was a burden. The warmth that once filled their home started to fade. Tafari became distant, his mind always somewhere else. When Zalika tried to talk to him, he barely listened. He would nod absent-mindedly, his eyes fixed on something unseen. The laughter that used to fill their nights became rare. Their once lively conversations were replaced with silence, heavy and unspoken. Zalika tried to ignore the growing ache in her chest. She told herself it was just work stress, that he was tired, that things would go back to normal soon. She cooked his favorite meals, hoping the familiar taste would remind him of the love they shared. She dressed in the beautiful clothes he used to admire, hoping he would notice. But nothing changed. Tafari barely touched his food. His eyes no longer lingered on her the way they used to. The man who once made her feel like the most cherished woman in the world now treated her like a shadow in their home. One night, as they lay in bed, Zalika reached for his hand, longing for the comfort of his touch. But he pulled away, turning his back to her without a word. A lump formed in her throat, but she swallowed her pain, convincing herself that tomorrow would be better. Deep down, though, a fear had begun to take root in her heart. Something was wrong. She could feel it, but she wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. One afternoon, as Zalika sat outside her home, lost in thought, her best friend Amari approached her with a concerned look. Amari had been watching closely, noticing the changes in Tafari that Zalika refused to see. She knew how deeply Zalika loved him, but love, she feared, had blinded her friend to an uncomfortable truth. "Zalika," Amari said gently, sitting beside her, "I need to talk to you about Tafari." Zalika sighed. She had been avoiding this conversation, knowing Amari had something to say that she didn't want to hear. "What about him?" she asked, forcing a smile. Amari hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I've seen him, Zalika. He's different. He's not the man he used to be." Zalika's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. "He's just been stressed with work. Business is growing, and it's taking up all his time." Amari shook her head. "No, my friend, this isn't just work. Have you noticed the expensive things he suddenly has? A new belt, fine shoes, even that gold ring on his finger. Tafari has never been a man of luxury, yet now he wears things far beyond what he could afford. Zalika frowned, remembering the first time she saw the gold ring on his hand. She had asked him about it, and he had laughed it off, saying a customer had gifted it to him as thanks for a job well done. She had believed him then. She wanted to believe him now. Maybe he's just treating himself after working so hard, she said weakly. Amari sighed. And what about the way he treats you? He used to hold your hand every time you walked together. He used to look at you like you were the only woman in the world. But now, he barely looks at you at all. Zalika swallowed hard, blinking back the sting of tears. She had noticed. Of course she had. The warmth in his eyes was gone. The affection in his voice had faded. But she had told herself it was just a rough patch, that all marriages went through phases. Amari, he is my husband, she whispered. I have to trust him. Amari took her hand. Trust is important, Zalika, but so is truth. Open your eyes before it's too late. Zalika pulled her hand away gently, shaking her head. I know Tafari. He loves me. I just need to be patient. Amari sighed, knowing that nothing she said would convince Zalika right now. But deep inside, she feared that soon, the truth would reveal itself in a way that Zalika could no longer ignore. That evening, as Zalika prepared dinner, Tafari stood by the door, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. He looked sharp, almost too well dressed for someone who was simply heading to his workshop. I have to work late, he said casually, not meeting her eyes. A big order came in and I need to finish it before the deadline. Zalika wiped her hands on her apron and forced a smile. You've been working so hard lately. Maybe I can bring you some food later. Tafari hesitated, just for a moment, before shaking his head. No need. I'll eat when I get home. Something about the way he said it made her stomach twist, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had promised herself she would trust him, no matter what. Still, as the evening wore on, uneasiness settled over her like a heavy blanket. She tried to focus on her chores, but doubt kept creeping into her mind. What if Amari was right? What if Tafari was hiding something? Finally, she decided to surprise him. She packed a warm meal in a basket, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and made her way to his workshop. The streets of Marundi were quiet, the sky filled with stars, and for a moment, she told herself she was overthinking everything. But when she arrived, her heart stopped. The shop was locked. She stood there for a moment, staring at the heavy wooden door. She knocked lightly, then harder, waiting for a response. Nothing. The place was completely dark. No sign of life inside. Confused, she took a step back. If Tafari wasn't here, then where was he? The cold night air sent a shiver down her spine as she turned toward home, her mind racing. Maybe he had gone to meet a client somewhere else? Maybe she was just being paranoid. But as she neared their house, her breath caught in her throat. There was laughter, soft, intimate laughter, coming from inside. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer. The windows were shut, but the sound drifted through the cracks in the door. A woman's voice whispering. Tafari's deep chuckle in response. Her legs felt weak beneath her. Slowly, she reached for the door. Her fingers curled around the handle, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. And then, she heard it, her name, spoken in a mocking tone. The woman inside laughed again, and Tafari's voice followed, low and affectionate, in a way he hadn't spoken to Zalika in months. The basket slipped from her hands, the food spilling onto the ground. For a long moment, she just stood there, frozen, her body refusing to move. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she pushed the door open. Zalika's hands shook as she pushed the door open, her breath caught in her throat. A cold wave of fear and disbelief rushed through her, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw next. There, in the flickering light of the oil lamp, Tafari lay in their bed, with another woman, Nyana, the widow from the village, the woman known for her beauty, her charm, the way men seemed to gravitate toward her. She had always been friendly, always smiling, always lingering too long in conversations with married men. Zalika had never paid her much attention, never thought she would have a reason to, until now. Time seemed to slow. Tafari and Nyana scrambled, pulling the covers over themselves, their faces frozen in shock. Tafari's eyes widened as he saw his wife standing in the doorway, her face pale, her hands gripping the doorframe as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. Zalika, he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She could only stare, her mind struggling to make sense of the betrayal unfolding before her. The man she had loved, the man she had defended, the man she had trusted despite all the warnings. He had done this. In their home, in their bed. "Zalika, wait," Tafari said, his voice desperate now as he sat up, reaching for her. "It's not what you think." But Zalika let out a hollow laugh, a sound so broken it barely felt like it came from her own lips. "Not what I think." Was he truly going to insult her with lies even now? Nyana, wrapped in the sheets, looked away, her face flushed with guilt. Or was it shame? Zalika couldn't tell, and she didn't care. Nothing mattered in that moment except the unbearable weight crushing her chest. Tears blurred her vision as she stepped back. Her legs felt weak. Her heart felt like it had been torn from her chest. But she couldn't stay there. She couldn't stand in that room, breathing the same air as the man who had just shattered her world. Without another word, she turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. She just needed to escape, to get as far away from Tafari and the suffocating betrayal as possible. Behind her, she heard him call her name, heard the sound of footsteps as he scrambled to follow her, but she didn't stop. Her tears mixed with the night air as she ran into the darkness, her heart breaking with every step. Zalika stumbled through the dark, her vision blurred by tears. The world around her felt distant, her body moving on its own, while her heart lay shattered in pieces. She didn't know how far she had run, but somehow her feet led her to Amari's home. She knocked weakly, barely able to stand. Within seconds, the door swung open, revealing Amari's worried face. The moment she saw Zalika's tear-streaked face and trembling body, she knew. "Zalika," Amari whispered, pulling her inside without another word. Zalika collapsed onto the floor, her sobs breaking free, as if the walls she had tried to build around her pain had finally crumbled. Amari knelt beside her, holding her as she wept, deep, painful cries that came from the very depths of her soul. Hours passed, but the pain didn't ease. Even as Amari led her to a bed, even as the sky brightened with the first light of dawn, Zalika's heart felt heavy, like an unbearable weight pressing down on her chest. Sleep didn't come, only memories, the laughter she and Tafari had shared, the promises he had made, the life they had built together. Was it all a lie? By morning, something inside her hardened. She couldn't run forever. She couldn't stay curled up in pain while Tafari continued his life as if nothing had happened. She needed to face him. With a deep breath, she stood, wiping away her tears. Amari looked at her, concern in her eyes. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Zalika nodded. "I have to be." She walked back to her home, the place that no longer felt like hers. With every step, she braced herself, hoping, praying, that Tafari would show even a sliver of remorse, that he would fall to his knees, beg for forgiveness, tell her it was a mistake. But when she pushed open the door, Tafari stood there, arms crossed, his expression cold, not guilty, not regretful, just irritated. "You came back," he said, as if he had expected her to disappear forever. Zalika swallowed the lump in her throat. "Why, Tafari? Why did you do this to me?" Instead of answering, he let out a sigh, rubbing his temple as if he were the one burdened. "You wouldn't understand, Zalika. Then help me understand." His eyes met hers, but there was no love in them, only frustration. "You were too perfect," he said flatly, "too controlling. You suffocated me with your love, always making sure everything was in place, always expecting me to be the perfect husband." Zalika felt the words like knives piercing her chest. She had given him nothing but love, yet he spoke as if she were the problem. She had come looking for regret, but all she found was a man who didn't deserve the love she had given him. Zalika walked away from Tafari for the last time. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't beg him to see the pain he had caused. She simply turned and left, her heart heavy, but her mind clear. Tafari had already made his choice. Now, she had to make hers. With nowhere else to go, she went to her older brother, Kwame. The moment he saw her standing at his doorstep, eyes swollen from tears and shoulders weighed down by grief, he didn't ask questions. He simply pulled her into a tight embrace. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered. "Just know that you are not alone." For days, Zalika barely spoke. She moved through life in a daze, trying to understand how everything had crumbled so quickly. But in the quiet of Kwame's home, surrounded by family who truly cared for her, something inside her began to shift. One morning, as she stood by the window watching the sunrise, she made a decision. She would not let heartbreak define her. Tafari had taken her love for granted, but he would not take her future. She needed to rebuild herself. Kwame owned a small trading business, dealing in fabrics, spices, and handcrafted goods. Zalika had never imagined herself as a merchant, but she was smart, resourceful, and determined to prove her worth. She asked Kwame to let her help with the business. At first, he hesitated, worried she wasn't ready, but when he saw the fire in her eyes, he knew she wouldn't take no for an answer. Within weeks, Zalika threw herself into work, learning everything she could. She traveled to markets, negotiated deals, and studied the art of trade. She was no longer just a woman who had been betrayed. She was a woman with purpose. The same intelligence and strength that Tafari had once called too controlling now made her one of the most respected traders in the region. Customers admired her sharp mind, her honesty, and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. She proved that she was more than a broken heart. One afternoon, as she finalized a trade deal, she caught her reflection in a mirror hanging from a merchant's stall. For the first time in a long while, she saw herself, not as the woman Tafari had betrayed, but as the woman she had become. Strong, independent, reborn. Zalika smiled. Her past would always be a part of her, but it would not define her. She had lost love, but in its place, she had found something far greater, herself. Tafari had always believed he was in control. He thought he could have everything: a devoted wife, a passionate lover, and a carefree life where nothing would change. But the moment Zalika walked away, everything began to unravel. At first, he didn't care. He told himself he was finally free. No more expectations, no more feeling suffocated by Zalika's love. He had Nyana now, beautiful, exciting, and full of promises. She made him feel like a king, whispering sweet words into his ear, laughing at his jokes, and assuring him that life would only get better. But reality struck sooner than he expected. With Zalika gone, Tafari's home no longer had the warmth it once did. The food wasn't prepared, the space wasn't kept in order, and the peace he had taken for granted was gone. Nyana, who had always praised him, suddenly became distant. She started asking for more: fine clothes, gold earrings, gifts he could barely afford. "Where is all the money you used to have?" she asked one evening, arms crossed. "I didn't leave my comfortable life just to struggle." Tafari tried to assure her that his carpentry business was still strong, but that was a lie. The truth was, business had started to decline the moment Zalika left. She had been the one managing their finances, keeping records, and helping him make wise investments. Without her, he had no idea how to maintain the accounts. Orders became fewer. Customers who once trusted him now hesitated. It didn't take long for word to spread through the village. Tafari was no longer the man he used to be. And just like that, Nyana was gone. One evening, Tafari returned home to find her belongings missing. No note, no goodbye, just emptiness. He searched for her, but she had already moved on, latching onto another wealthy man who could give her the luxury she truly desired. That was when Tafari finally felt the weight of his choices. He had destroyed his marriage for a woman who never loved him. He had lost a wife who had given him everything, only to be abandoned by the one he had chosen over. The villagers, once respectful, now laughed behind his back. "Did you hear? Tafari lost everything." The fool thought he could trade a diamond for a stone. No woman of worth will ever trust him again. His workshop, once filled with orders, now stood nearly empty. He sat inside, staring at his tools, his hands shaking. His once proud name had become a joke. For the first time, Tafari understood what true loss felt like. Not just losing wealth or a business, but losing the respect of the people, the love of a good woman, and the life he had foolishly thrown away. And worst of all, there was no one left to blame but himself. Years had passed, and Zalika was no longer the woman she once was. She had built a thriving business, traveled to distant markets, and earned the respect of traders far and wide. Strength and wisdom now shaped her, replacing the pain that once haunted her. She had left Marundi behind, but when the opportunity arose to expand her business in her childhood village, she felt it was time to return. Not for the past, but for the future she was creating. Walking through the familiar streets, she marveled at how much had changed. The village had grown, new businesses had emerged, and faces both old and new greeted her with admiration. She was no longer just Zalika, the carpenter's wife. She was Zalika, the successful merchant, a woman of her own making. One afternoon, as she oversaw the setup of her new trading post in the market square, her eyes caught a figure she almost didn't recognize. A man, dressed in tattered clothes with sunken cheeks and weary eyes, moved from stall to stall, begging for work. Her heart stopped for a moment. It was Tafari, the once proud, confident man she had loved, was now nothing more than a shadow of himself. His once strong shoulders were hunched. His hands, once skilled and steady, trembled slightly as he held them out in desperation. No longer the respected carpenter, he had become just another man struggling to survive. She watched as he approached different traders, pleading for work. "I can carve, I can build, I just need a chance," he said, but most turned him away. Zalika had heard rumors of his downfall, of how Nyana had abandoned him, how his business had collapsed, and how the same villagers who once respected him now barely acknowledged his presence. But seeing it with her own eyes was different. Then, to her shock, Tafari turned and walked toward her. "Madam, please," he began, keeping his gaze lowered, not yet realizing who she was. "I am a skilled carpenter. I will work hard. Just give me a chance." Zalika stayed silent, watching him. Something in her silence made him look up. Their eyes met, and in that instant, she saw it. The flicker of recognition, the widening of his eyes, the way his breath caught in his throat as the truth hit him. "Zalika," he whispered, disbelief and shame washing over him. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Everything she had become, everything he had lost, it was all there, in the silence between them. Tafari's lips trembled, as if he wanted to say something, but what words could fix what had already been done? What apology could erase the betrayal? Zalika took a slow breath. She had waited years for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt no anger, no bitterness. Just the quiet understanding that life had already given Tafari the lesson he deserved. Tafari's knees hit the dusty ground as he looked up at Zalika, his eyes filled with regret. His hands trembled as he reached for the hem of her robe, but he dared not touch it. His voice, once strong and confident, was now weak and broken. "Zalika, please," he whispered. "I was a fool. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't deserve your mercy, but I beg you, give me another chance." The market had gone quiet. Villagers who had once gossiped about Zalika's misfortune now stood in stunned silence, watching the once proud Tafari bow before the woman he had betrayed. Some whispered among themselves, nudging each other. "Look at him now," one murmured. "He had a queen, but he chose dust," another said. Zalika felt their eyes on her, waiting to see what she would do. But she wasn't thinking about them. Her gaze was locked on Tafari, the man who had once been her whole world. She remembered the nights she had cried, the humiliation, the heartbreak. She had begged him to love her, to see her worth, but he had only pushed her away. And now, here he was, the roles reversed, pleading for her forgiveness. Tafari's breath was shaky as he continued. "When you left, everything fell apart. I thought I was free, but I was lost. Nyana, she never loved me. She only wanted what I had. And when I had nothing, she left without a second thought. I see it now. I see what I did to you. I see the pain I caused." Zalika didn't move. Her heart was steady, her emotions calm. She had spent years healing, growing, becoming stronger. She was no longer the woman who needed Tafari's love to survive. "Please," Tafari begged, lowering his head even more. "Even if you can't take me back, even if you never love me again, just tell me you forgive me." The weight of his words hung in the air. For so long, Zalika had dreamed of this moment. She had imagined yelling at him, making him suffer, giving him a taste of his own pain. But now, standing before him, she felt no need for revenge. She had already won. Lifting her chin, she finally spoke, her voice strong yet calm. "Tafari, I spent years waiting for you to see my worth, but I no longer need your validation. I forgave you a long time ago, not for you, but for myself." A tear slipped down Tafari's cheek, but Zalika didn't waver. She had healed. She had moved on. And now, she would leave him with nothing but the weight of his own choices. Turning away, she walked forward, her head high, her heart free. And Tafari, still kneeling in the dust, finally understood the true meaning of loss. Zalika stood tall, her gaze steady as she looked down at Tafari. The man who had once made her feel small was now the one kneeling before her, his face stained with desperation. But as she watched him, she felt no anger, no hatred, only pity. Tafari had destroyed everything they had, and now he was drowning in the ruins of his own choices. Once, she would have given anything to hear him admit his mistakes, to see him regret the pain he caused her. But now, the words meant nothing. His regret could not erase the past. His tears could not undo the betrayal. She took a slow breath, her voice calm but firm. "Tafari, I forgave you long ago," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refused to let your betrayal chain me to the past. I healed, I rebuilt myself, and a woman who rebuilds herself never returns to the hands that broke her." The villagers gasped, whispering among themselves. Tafari's head dropped, shame flooding his face. He had expected anger, maybe even tears. But this was worse. Zalika did not hate him. She did not love him. She simply did not need him anymore. She turned away, her steps slow but certain. The market path stretched ahead, lined with traders who now saw her as a symbol of strength. She had walked through fire and come out stronger. Tafari remained on his knees, watching her leave. He wanted to call out, to beg again, but he knew it was useless. Zalika was not the woman he had left behind. She was someone greater now. And he was just another man who had thrown away his greatest gift. As Zalika disappeared into the crowd, Tafari felt the weight of his choices settle over him like an unshakable shadow. He had lost her forever, not because she refused to forgive, but because she had outgrown the pain he had caused. And in that moment, he realized that sometimes the deepest punishment is knowing that the person you broke no longer belongs to you. Zalika stepped into her carriage, her heart steady, her spirit unshaken. As the horses began to move, she looked out at the bustling market one last time. The same village that had once whispered about her suffering now watched in silent admiration. She had not begged, she had not sought revenge, and yet she had won. Not by tearing Tafari down, but by rising so high that his betrayal no longer had power over her. The wind brushed against her face, carrying with it a sense of freedom she had never known before. For years, she had tied her happiness to Tafari's love, believing that his acceptance defined her worth. But now, she understood. Her value had never been his to determine. She had always been enough, always been strong. She had simply forgotten it for a while. Tafari had lost everything, but Zalika had gained more than she ever imagined. She had built a life of success, respect, and independence. She no longer needed love that begged to be proven, nor did she need validation from a man who once failed to see her worth. As the carriage rolled forward, she smiled, not out of spite, not out of triumph over Tafari's downfall, but out of pure, undeniable peace. She was free, she had won, and no one could take that away from her. True strength is not in begging for love from someone who does not value you. It is in knowing your worth and having the courage to walk away from pain. Zalika gave her heart to Tafari, but he betrayed her. Instead of drowning in sorrow, she chose to rebuild her life. She proved that a woman does not need to stay where she is not respected. She rose above heartbreak, became successful, and found happiness on her own terms. In the end, the greatest victory is not revenge. It is finding peace and creating the life you truly deserve.